I'm continuing the series here on Faithful. And this is more than just a sermon series. This is actually a campaign that kind of an important, kind of critical time here in the life of our church. We've been talking about how faithful God has been to us through lots of different stages of our history, specifically getting us into this building and all the miracles and obstacles to get in here. And then we've been also talking about the next stage, the next thing that we think that God is leading us into. I introduced this last week, and we're going to do it for the next couple of weeks. I've been shooting some videos with some folks in the church who've been talking about their experience here at the North Jersey Vineyard, what they're excited about, their perspective. So here is Ray and Tara Cho to tell us a little bit more about life in the vineyard from their perspective. Let's check it out. Spotlights.
One of the things that I really love about the church is that when we hear from God, we kind of persevere and move forward as a unit. I really loved the process of getting into this building, how the pastor was sending out emails asking for prayer, and we were already praying, and we just got words for each other and encouraged each other to move forward. And that I just love that I can be part of the church and be all in, knowing that we're following God's plan and not our own plan, even if it's crazy and it doesn't make any sense.
So one thing I really love about this church is its focus on Jesus. Not just that we learn about him and know things about him, but we're all encouraged to really get to know him and have that personal relationship and actually have a walk with him.
I think for me, being part of the children's ministry, I've seen how we were so cramped at the old space, and then moving here, it got so much better, but then all of a sudden we started growing again, and I can see the need for more space, especially in the children's worship room, and even in the classrooms. And so the plans for moving into that temporary space just have me very excited, because we can grow as a children's ministry as we are inviting more people and inviting the community in, and I think that would be really amazing.
For me, I'm excited to see the church grow. Just really want to see the church reach more people. And it seems like historically, whenever the church has moved into a bigger space, God has somehow filled that. So just excited to see that again. And one piece that I'm really excited about is the potential of having an actual food bank here, where on Saturday mornings we can serve the community by serving them food or giving them food, but also having a chance to pray with them. So the past 4 years for us, it seems like it's been a roller coaster ride. It was exciting at first, and then it was disappointing, and it was frustrating, and then it was back to being exciting, and then we're back to being frustrated. But what's amazing is through it all, we really just got to see God working through it. That we got to see the unity of the people in the church, and we got to see God answering the prayers. As hard as the town tried to bankrupt us, every step of the way, God made it so that we could get through. He gave us a lawyer that was able to defer our fees. He gave us a landlord that was able to defer our fees, which is absolutely amazing that all the odds were against us, but he brought us through.
For me personally, it was a lesson in spiritual warfare, because when we were praying and we had all of those things happening all at once, and then I felt like as a church people were saying, in my life, every category we're being attacked. And it was, you know what, if that's happening, we're on the right track. Like, we're a threat to the enemy, and we need to keep pushing through and keep doing this. And I feel like it's been good, because we kind of both see our money, we have it in loose hands, right? And it's ready for God to use however he wants to use it. So after we give, I don't feel like we're like, how exactly is this being used? And I need an itemized list. It's just, I trust the church, and I trust you, and I trust where it's going to go, because I know, again, that we're focused on God, we're focused on Jesus and doing his work.
Yeah, for us, this campaign is really just a natural progression of what started 4 years ago. Yeah. 4 years ago, we were very prayerful in making our decision to commit. And, as time passed, we even decided to increase our giving. And, that was without even knowing what kind of building we'd be in or where we'd be. And now that we're here and God has brought us here, again, it was a natural progression for us, because we see God working all through these years, and we want to keep the momentum going.
It's exciting to be a part of it.
Yeah.
Well, right. Well, thank you, Ray and Tara, for that. Let me just be really, really clear just about something. This is kind of my message, just to be really, really clear about stuff. No reading between the lines, no nuance, just going to kind of lay it out there. We are in the midst of having a week full of meetings. We're calling them Faithful Vision meetings. And so right after this service, I had one last night. I've got one right after the 11 o'clock service. I'll have another one after the Spanish service later this afternoon. Right as soon as this service is over, I hope that many of you will join me in the warehouse, which is going to be the future auditorium of the church, where we're going to have an opportunity to talk much more specifically about our future, about what the plans are for what this building can be once we get out of kind of the temporary setup, what the challenges are that we have, just a good conversation about our future. And so if you're here with kids, we got that covered. So after they're done with kids' church, they can go into the large kids' church room, and there's going to be somebody in there with them, and they can watch a video, and then the meeting it'll be about 45 minutes, because here's the deal. From the time that I'm done preaching from this service, the time this service ends to when I have to start preaching at the Spanish service, I have a limited amount of time. So I can promise you that it will not be a long meeting. If you're unable to make the one right after this service, there will be another one Wednesday night at 7:30. And people who, I've been saying, if you consider this your home church, I would just love for you to attend one of these meetings and be part of the conversation. So what this Faithful campaign is about, just again, to be really clear, is that first thing is that we are hoping to raise money so that we can pay the $300,000 mortgage payment that we have coming up to Boswell Engineering. We bought this building from Boswell Engineering. It was a $3 million building. The terms of it was 10% due at signing, $300,000. We paid that. 10% due a year later. That was due a year ago, which tells you how long we've been kind of on this journey. And they pushed that back a year, and so that's due in June. So that's the first thing that we're hoping to see happen, is that we'd be able to meet that obligation, and then we want to be able to start planning and preparing, and just in a responsible way say, okay, God, when can we see the build out? When can we see the 700-seat auditorium that's going to be there? When can we see the incredible kids' church environment that we're going to have that's going to enable us to more than double the amount of kids we can minister to in one service? The youth center, the food pantry, all the kind of full redemptive potential of this building. Now, a few weeks ago, before I started this Faithful series and we started publicly talking about this, I invited some leaders and the staff to attend some kind of like pre-Faithful Vision meetings. And so that happened a few weeks ago. And I asked them if they would consider making a lead commitment to this campaign, and if they were open to doing that, to get that into me by the end of this week. And so we had, just kind of happy to announce, very encouraging to announce, that 21 different families or individuals made a lead commitment to give above and beyond what they normally give to the church for a 2-year period. And so the total of that came in, 21 families made a lead commitment to give $285,500. So we're, well on their way. And what was really cool about, this was that 100,000 of that is going to be first fruits money that comes in June. And so this, as I've been saying, that as long as we can make half of the payment to Boswell, I think we'll be good. We kind of are almost already there, and I'm really optimistic that we're going to be able to retire this whole thing. And then what's going to happen, again, just for clarity, on the weekend of June 3rd and 4th, we're going to be asking everyone in the church to over the next couple of weeks, to be praying about how you can help, what God would say to you about helping us get there. And we'll be receiving the commitments during the worship service. It'll just be kind of before the sermon. We're doing baby dedication that day. We'll be doing lots of other stuff, but we'll receive those commitments and just kind of celebrate that. There'll be an opportunity on the 10th and 11th for you to give your commitments as well. And throughout the month of June, we'll be asking people to say, out of what you're committing, what can be given now in the month of June so that we can meet that obligation. The title of my message today is Myths People Believe About Giving. And as I said, I'm kind of intentionally going into this weekend just saying, all right, you know what? When I started this campaign 2 weeks ago, this series, I talked about our history. I talked about all the different wonderful stages that God has led us through, and then I talked about who we are as a people, what it is we value, what it is we're committed to. Last week, I preached a message on faith, and you kind of had to, you could see the connection to what God is doing in faith, but kind of read between the lines. This week is going to be no reading between the lines required. I kind of figured this is my one chance. I'm just going to lay it out there. I'm just going to, I'm going to put it out there. Almost consider this kind of a little bit of a family meeting. And I do want to say, for those of you who are first-time guests with us today, this is a little bit different than what we normally do. We are at a kind of key and crucial kind of moment in our history. So appreciate you just kind of bearing with us. And hopefully maybe this will give you a little bit of a sense, like being a part of this family meeting can give you a little bit of sense of who we are and what it is we value. So let's talk about myths that people have about giving. The passage we're going to look at is 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Verses 1 to 9. I'm going to read it first, and then I'll kind of set up the context for it, and we'll dive into it, because this kind of exposes some of the myths that people have. So it says, "And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. And they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God also to us. So we urge Titus, just as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part. But since you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love we have kindled in you, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. I am not commanding you, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich." So 3 myths there's more that we could talk about. I got time for 3. First is that my giving doesn't make a difference. That when people think about giving to the Lord, you put the check in or the cash out of the envelope or you give online, kind of think like, you give, you don't give. It's kind of not really that big of a deal. Let me give you a little bit of background here. So the Apostle Paul is collecting an offering from all of the Gentile churches, all of the non-Jewish churches that are in Europe, in parts of Asia, for the church in Jerusalem and Judea. So the history of how Christianity spread in the first century is that it started with Jews putting their faith, understanding that Jesus was the Messiah. And so the church was born in Jerusalem and Judea. And then there was a missionary expansion. So Paul and Barnabas and some others were sent out to preach the gospel, and they saw churches, thriving churches, being established all over the Gentile, non-Jewish world. And so the Jewish people were having a really hard time at this moment. And there was a bunch of different reasons for it. There's a historical reason that you actually can read about in some contemporary history from that time. There was a crop failure that affected the entire region, so everybody was suffering, but Christians were suffering even more because they were experiencing a lot of persecution. If they had a business, their business was being boycotted because they had sold out the Jewish people by putting their faith in Jesus, so nobody would shop at their stores and their stores would close. Many of them were kicked out of their families. They were excommunicated, and especially when there were hard times, you got through it as a family, and they were, disinherited. They were kind of thrown out. They were being persecuted. They were being beaten. They were being put in prison. Some of them were even losing their life. So they were having this really hard time. Now, this collection from the Gentile churches for Jerusalem pops up in the Bible quite a bit, actually. It was kind of almost a big component of Paul's kind of ministry. You see it here in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and chapter 9. You can read about it in Galatians chapter 2, Romans 15, 1 Corinthians 16. And so this was a big deal for a lot of different reasons, not just because it was a generous act of charity. It was also a big deal, according to Paul, because of the fact that the Gentile Christians owed their kind of spiritual legacy to the mother church in Jerusalem. Paul is basically saying, hey, listen, Jerusalem and Judea, that's where all of this started. they sent missionaries to you so you could hear the gospel. Now you have an obligation, since you received spiritual blessings from Jerusalem, you have an obligation to return material blessings when they're in need. Paul makes that, like he says it explicitly in Romans 15:27. They were pleased to do it, talking about the Gentile Christians, and indeed they owe it to them. For if the Gentiles have shared in the Jews' spiritual blessings, they owe it to the Jews to share with them in their material blessings. So it kind of lays out very clearly, if you're blessed spiritually, it's returned in material blessings. But there was something else that's going on that was a big deal to Paul. In the Old Testament, prophets would talk about in the day of the Lord, that when the kingdom of God is set up, that the riches of the Gentile nations would flow to Jerusalem. And Paul, a Christian understanding was the already and the not yet. When Jesus rose from the dead, that the kingdom of God was already established, but not yet in its fullness. And that's kind of like a grid for how we understand life, this already and not yet time that we're living in right now. He saw this collection as an already and not yet type of thing. Yes, when the kingdom is fully established, the riches of the nations will flood towards God's people. But this was a not yet expression of that truth. As the Gentiles were taking this collection and the money was flowing towards Jerusalem, it was like, passages like in Isaiah chapter 60, verse 5, where it says, "Then you will look and be radiant. Your heart will throb and swell with joy. The wealth on the seas will be brought to you. To the riches of the nations will come. Your gates will always stand open. They will never be shut day or night, so that people may bring the wealth of the nations, their kings led in triumphal procession." So all that to say, and there were other reasons, Paul saw this giving as a really big deal. This really mattered. Now, what we're talking about here in our context is a giving campaign. And so we've had, a history. We've been around for 20 years. So we've had a couple times where we've had stages, where we've had seasons like this. And what people gave in a campaign made a huge difference in the lives of people. So about 12 or 13 years ago, we were meeting in a little tiny warehouse in Hackensack. Remember, I showed that picture a couple of years ago. I'm just curious, and with the lights, I have to go like this to see you guys. How many of you remember the warehouse in Hackensack? All right, so a few of you remember the warehouse in Hackensack. We were a church of a little bit under 200 people. We were having multiple services. Remember I told you a couple weeks ago we had no parking whatsoever. We knew it was time for something bigger. And so we didn't do like a full campaign. What we did is I talked about it in church for a few weeks. I visited the small groups. There were enough, a few small groups that I could go visit. And we had one Sunday where we asked people to give a special offering that would help us secure a new location. And so the little church, people responded. They prayed and they gave, and we had $125,000 come in on that one particular Sunday. And that's what enabled us to make the move from the little church in Hackensack to go to 370 North Street in Teterboro, where we've been for the last 12 years. And so it was the gift that was given by the people who were part of the church at that time that enabled us to go from being a church of, a little bit under 200 people to a church eventually of 500 to 600 people. And so it was that giving that enabled, all of the salvations and the baptisms and the expanding children's ministry and everything else that went on. It made a huge difference. How many of you were here a little bit over 4 years ago? When we first started talking about, there should be more hands than there were from 12 years ago. Okay, so a number of you, a lot of the people who raised their hand just now were the people who prayed and gave for us to be able to own this building. Because we knew, we're paying, we kind of had taken that building as far as we could. There was one period of time where we were having 6 services a weekend, which was crazy. And we knew that we wanted to go from paying rent to paying a mortgage to having a bigger space. And so we talked about it, and people just sacrificially gave. It was amazing. What people thought they were giving to at that time was money to enable us to buy the building and do the build out for it. What we didn't know is that it was money to enable us to buy the building and then to navigate the 3 years of legal hurdles that we had coming in here, which was actually spiritual warfare, that we were dealing with in order to be able to come into this place. And they did so in faith. They did so, many of you did so 4 years ago in faith, believing that your gifts were going to make a difference, to help us buy a building and be able to move forward. And you know what? Even with all of the twists and turns, and the curtains and the people talking in the cafe while we're worshiping and all the stuff that goes on with the challenges of kind of being set up temporarily. Excuse me. We moved in here in the beginning of January, and we are already seeing God do some incredible things. We really are. I mean, I set a goal every year. I set goals. I pray and I set goals. You know, I kind of feel that if you want to progress, you got to set goals, you know. And so one of the goals that I set for this year, for 2017, is that we would see 100 people make a commitment to Christ. That, you know, designated, the way I keep track of that is by people checking off on their connection card, you know, that they get sent some stuff, they're followed up. And so that was my goal for this year. We're not even 5 months in, and we've already seen 48 people commit their life to Jesus Christ just since we moved into this building back in January. A number of those folks are going to be baptized in a few weeks. Now, here's something that I thought was crazy. Celine and I put our heads together and we looked at connection cards from the beginning of January. It is a conservative estimate. I actually think it could be more than this, but we don't ask for like how large the families are and just, you know, like how many kids do you have? That would be a little intrusive, like how many kids and all of that. So as far as the connection cards that we've gotten from first-time guests, I believe that we have had at least 300 first-time guests come into this building since we moved in here. I mean, in just, 4.5 months, we had 100 first-time guests come on Easter weekend and 200 come in other times. So even with the curtains and the temporary kind of setup, we're seeing God do some incredible stuff. That's why I transitioned from having like quarterly newcomers lunch to monthly pizza with the pastor, because I'm like, there's so many new people coming. We got to try to connect and try to, kind of build some relationships here. We have some weekends. We have over 100 kids who are in our kids' church. We have between 50 and 60 junior and senior high kids who come to our Wednesday night junior high meeting, our Thursday night senior high meeting. Let me tell you something that's going on in our senior high ministry that you are probably not aware of. We have about 25 every single week, about 25 Spanish kids who don't speak any English whatsoever coming to our senior high youth ministry. There's a woman that we got connected with who is the ESL teacher in Hackensack, and she's been, it's kind of crazy getting the, Grimaldi and others and Shauna, they go and they just pick up all of these kids and we try to get them here and we send even some of them home in Ubers, we really need a bus, but that's another story. But it's amazing. These kids are coming and they're hearing the gospel, and they're recent immigrants. And fortunately, we have a youth pastor who speaks Spanish. But as Grimaldi and I were talking about the challenges of, well, how do you have youth group in Spanish, but then also in English for the English-speaking kids at the same time? It's a challenge. I said to Grimaldi, I said, you know what, though? There are missionaries who live and die their whole life on the mission field and don't see that kind of fruit, the opportunity for that kind of cross-cultural impact and seeing these kids, hearing the gospel. We have so many people, just since we came in here, we opened up those prayer rooms in the back. I don't know if you've noticed, you probably have, but we had to take one of those rooms and turn it into a waiting room, for people to fill out their insurance information. And no, we don't make you do that. But because there's so many people wanting prayer, we're already seeing, when people gave 4 years ago in faith, we're already seeing fruit from that, even though we're kind of set up like this. And so, one of the things, and this again, I'm just laying it out there today. And just next week come back and we'll just kind of get your business as usual, but bear with me. Over the next 2 weeks, as you guys are praying and thinking about what God is saying to you, about what you can give and what you can support beyond what you normally give to the church for 2 years, don't just think about yourself. Don't just think about your kids. Don't just think about the people that you know and love in this church. And don't even just think about how God has been so faithful to us in the past. Think about the hundreds, even thousands of people that we haven't met yet that God is going to bring to our church. Because that's been the history of what he's done with us. As we've taken a step and as people have given in faith, God has sent, God has filled. And so we're giving in faith for the stories that we're going to hear about. We're giving giving in faith for the salvations that are going to happen, the baptisms that are going to happen, the marriages that are on the brink of ruin that God is going to intervene and God is going to save, for the kids who are hearing the story that our culture is saying, which is a lame story. They're going to have an opportunity to hear the story of Jesus and the story of the kingdom, for the lonely people who will find a family here, for the people who will discover that God is living and alive and powerful because he healed them or he did some miracle in their life. Giving is an act of faith. And the people who gave in the past in our church, they were asked to believe in a future that they couldn't see. And what I believe is that God is asking us now, that we would be the ones who would give in faith for the future that God is leading us into. That 10 years from now, when I'm telling other stories and stuff, I'll talk about us and say, we were the ones that God said, believe and give and sacrifice for the future that I want to create. And so the myth that giving doesn't make a difference, in so many ways, that is absolutely not true. And we have seen in our history the difference that it makes. The second myth that I want to talk about is that people give generously only when they have the resources. 2 Corinthians 8:2 says, in the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. He's talking about the Macedonians, the ones who gave this incredible offering. Paul was just going all over the Christian world bragging about the generosity of these Macedonians, because where it says their extreme poverty, it literally means they're down to the depths poverty. They were scraping the bottom of the barrel. They were dealing with all sorts of different financial problems, and just like the people in Jerusalem were, they were dealing with a hard time. But you see, here's the thing. Generosity is not just the exclusive domain of the wealthy. It is a myth to say, because I don't have a lot of money, I can't be generous. Do you think when the Bible talks about the blessings of generosity, when Jesus says things like it is more blessed, or the Bible says it's more blessed to give than to receive, is that blessing only reserved for the top 1%ers? See, generosity isn't about how much money you give. Generosity is about your heart in giving. And these Macedonian Christians, you know what? They were experiencing great persecution from the Romans. The Christians were being persecuted. Rome had come into Macedonia. They took over their silver mines, their gold mines, their salt mines. They kind of, they took down all the trees in the area so they could build war boats. So they were suffering themselves as well as being persecuted for their faith. And Paul says that God doesn't hold back the blessings of generosity from the poor. Now, obviously, if you don't have a lot of money, you don't have a lot of means, it's going to affect the amount that can be given. But generosity is about your heart. And there's a story in the Gospels from Mark chapter 12 that just illustrates God's heart in this. Jesus is standing in the temple, and he's watching everyone come and give their gifts to the temple. And they would do it with fanfare. They would blow trumpets. They'd make a big deal out of it. And Jesus sees this little widow come up and put 2 copper coins in the offering. And there were no trumpets when she put the 2 copper coins in, because it was like nothing. But Jesus called the disciples together and he said, look, this is the giving that really makes a difference, because this widow is giving out of her scarcity, not out of her abundance. This is the giving that really gets God's attention. And you know what? I think that for us, kind of in this stage right now, I hope that we don't think about the amount that God says. All I'm asking for the people who consider this their home church over the next couple of weeks is that you pray and that you say, God, what would you have me do? And if God says nothing, then do nothing. If God gives you a number, then do that number. And it's not important the amount. What's important is your heart within it. I remember 4 years ago, there was a woman in our church, and she came to Jared and I. And her kind of backstory was that she was engaged, and her fiance tragically died. And so she had her engagement ring. And she said to Jared and I, she said, I want to give my engagement ring towards what God is doing. And Jared and I, because this woman didn't have a lot, Jared and I were like, no, that's too much. You need to hold on to this. And she said, you know what? She said, God used this church to save my life. This is what I have to give, and this is what I want to give. And so we were just humbled, and we were just overwhelmed, and we said, okay, wow, God bless you. That is incredibly humbling. See, let me just again, as I said, just want to share my heart. Those of you who've been around, those of you who are new, you don't know, necessarily the ins and outs of our story. But we have gone through this incredible journey, especially over this building. And the thing about this journey that we've been on, it's not just something that we're aware of. Every pastor in the vineyard knows what we've been through. People, from around the world know what we've been through. I've heard about other churches in this area knowing what we've been through. And so Phil Stroud, who's the national director, he talked to me a few months ago, and he said, Phil, he oversees the 650 vineyard churches in the U.S. He's connected with, deeply connected with the vineyard movement all over the world. He knows what's going on in the church. He said, I've heard a lot of stories about churches struggling to get into a building. I've never heard about as hard a struggle as what you guys have gone through. You guys win the award for hardest struggle. Now, here's the thing. Wouldn't it be great? I was just thinking about God is writing this great story. God is doing this great. We've got, God is doing great stuff. Wouldn't a fantastic ending of this story, of this kind of stage of our coming into the building and moving on with our future, wouldn't it be great if our story was, God was moving and working, and we bought this building, and we were excited about the ministry opportunities, and Satan was really scared about what God was going to do through the North Jersey Vineyard, so he threw everything that he had at us, threw just disappointments and betrayals and blocks and obstacles and delays, and, had all the money we had for renovations got burned through having to navigate all of this. I remember one of my favorite, movie series, the Rocky movies. And I remember when I was a teenager and I saw Rocky 3, I was just so I was so pumped up by it. And I love a part in it where Rocky is fighting Clubber Lang. Remember Mr. T? And Clubber Lang is just pummeling him in the face, just over and over again. And Rocky has his hands down at his sides, and every time he gets hit, he's like, ain't so bad, ain't so bad. Wouldn't it be a great story if we as a church, because of God's grace and because of his mercy, every haymaker that Satan threw at us, we just said, ain't so bad, because God is able, and if the end of our story was that the town thought they could bankrupt us, Satan thought we could be totally knocked off the rails, but we responded as a congregation, whether it's the widow's mite or whatever else it is, whether it's hey, I can do $10 a month or $100 a month or $1,000 a month or $10,000 a month, that we heard from God and we responded, and we as a church saw God restore what the locusts have eaten. That we could be able to go into the future and everything that God has for us. That would be a great ending to this story. And that's what I'm hopeful for. And then the last thing is this. The myth that people have to be manipulated and coerced in order to give. You got to use strong arm tactics. You got to really manipulate, and you got to coerce. Verse 3. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability, these poor Macedonian Christians, entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. And they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God to us. How crazy is that? These poor Macedonians begged Paul. They said, Paul, please don't leave us out. We want to contribute to the Jerusalem church. We want to help. See, what happens when the grace of God comes into your life is it completely distorts and turns upside down the whole concept of begging. Because when you've experienced the grace of God, you're not begging for yourself. You're begging for the opportunity to be used by God. Have you ever begged God to use you? I'm serious. They just said, God, you are moving in the earth. You are making everything new. God, your kingdom is coming. You have a message of the gospel that is hope and salvation for all. Oh, God, please use me. I don't want to waste my life just watching TV. God, use me. Have you ever begged God to use you? In Mark chapter 5, Jesus comes across the Gerasene demoniac. This poor guy, he's plagued by demons. He's running around naked in the tombs. Jesus sets him free. Now, what didn't have to happen, Jesus didn't have to say, hey, now that I set you free, you have to come with me. You have to serve me. You have to follow me. The guy who was just set free begged Jesus, said, please let me come with you. Isaiah, in Isaiah chapter 6, says he saw the Lord high and lifted up. He saw the glory of God, just had this incredible vision of God. And God said, whom shall I send? Isaiah said, me. Me, here I am. Send me. I want to go, God. I know they're gonna be mean to me and they're gonna be, but I want to be the one to go. See, that we would respond to say, God, we want the privilege of participating in what you're doing on the earth, God. We beg you, God, that you would use us. There's a great picture of this in the story of the Israelites as they were wandering around the wilderness. We give the Israelites a hard time, and it's deservedly so. I mean, they didn't have the faith to come into the promised land, and they were worshiping the golden calf, and there was rebellion. But there's actually a really incredible picture in Exodus chapter 36 where they wanted to build God a tabernacle because God was showing up and his presence was with the people, and they wanted to have a tabernacle that God could dwell in. And so every day they were bringing free will offerings to Moses and to the other leaders so this tabernacle could be constructed. In the law, there was a certain amount that they had to give. A free will offering was above what the law required. So verse 6, Exodus 36, verse 6, then Moses gave an order, and they sent this word throughout the camp. No man or woman is to make anything else as an offering for the sanctuary. And so the people were restrained from bringing more because what they already had was more than enough to do all the work. That's a picture of grace. That's what happens when God's grace comes into our life is we're the ones who beg and say, God, use me. God, I want to serve you. God, what can I do? And so verse 9, to end this passage here, it says, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich. Now listen, we're talking about generosity, we're talking about giving, but we can't, leave this subject without acknowledging and recognizing that there's no greater example of giving and generosity than the Lord Jesus Christ. Our giving, our generosity is not the most important thing. His giving, his generosity is the most important thing. And what we need to live out of and what we need to be about as a church is that we are in touch with the riches that Jesus has available for us, the true riches. That he who was rich, who was, set aside, lay aside the privileges of deity, that he who was rich became poor so that we through his poverty might become rich. That Jesus, he created us. And he loved us. And he left the comfort of heaven and he became a human being. He was rich and he became poor. And he experienced being hungry. He experienced being tired. He experienced betrayal. He experienced being beaten by the Roman soldiers. He experienced hanging on the cross. He experienced the lashings. He experienced the, my God, why have you forsaken me? When he bore our sin. And because of what he did, now his riches are available to us. That is the generosity, that's the giving that we need to focus on. And what we, as individuals and a church, what we've been about, what we will continue to be about, is helping people discover the true riches that are found in Jesus. Because God has given us an incredible calling. God has invited us to be a part as individuals and as a church, to be part of what he's doing here in North Jersey. And he's just getting started. And it is such a privilege. There is nothing that's better than being able to say, God, you are at work on the earth. God, I want to be a part of what it is that you're doing. I want to live from a place where I'm experiencing the true riches that you got for me. And I want to help people who are just kind of stumbling through life, pursuing all sorts of false things. I want them to realize that you are the pearl of great price, so that your riches will be something that becomes real to them, and that they will be able to receive the benefit of all of the incredible grace and sacrifice that you've done for us. That's what generosity and giving is all about, what he gave to us. Let's pray.